Now, it's the longest river in Africa, but there have been increasing disagreements over how the resources of the River Nile should be handled. But now, a regional agreement bringing together 10 countries, including Ethiopia, Uganda and Rwanda, has come into force. However, the agreement is opposed by Egypt, which the Nile is synonymous with, and Sudan. Both countries have had tension with Ethiopia over a dam built on a Nile tributary with claims that it affects water flow. Now, the treaty is designed to replace a 1929 agreement signed between Egypt and the United Kingdom that gave Cairo veto power over projects built on the river or its tributaries. However, it gave none of the other countries the Nile flows through any rights to the river's waters, and they've long been agitating for a more equitable share. Let's now discuss this further. Joining me in studio is Dr. Nicodemus Minde from the Institute for Security Studies here in Nairobi. Dr. Nicodemus, thank you so much for your time. Briefly, what does this agreement mean for the countries that signed onto it? What can they do now with it that they couldn't do previously?
One of the things that comes in this agreement is a number of principles or pillars, including the principle of equality, collaboration, and of course also resolution of conflicts jointly. And this gives more equitable chances to all the riparian countries in terms of equitable share of this resource, which is the Nile, which has benefits for social, cultural, political benefits for the riparian countries. So this particular agreement or protocol actually gives room for equitable resource sharing of the Nile.
Obviously, not everyone is happy with it. Egypt has opposed this for years. What does it mean for Egypt and for neighboring Sudan?
For sure, you can recall that Egypt has had a historical unfair or, upper hand in terms of the resources or allocation of the benefits of the Nile. And of course, this agreement comes to remedy these historical injustices or historical access to the Nile, which had given Egypt a lot of unfair advantage over other riparian countries, including Ethiopia. So you can see Egypt being aggrieved as well as Sudan.
They don't see that as an unfair advantage.
Historically, you can see. Historically, you can see, and actually, it has actually had an impact in what we call the hydropolitics of the region, and of course the geopolitical balances between the countries of the riparian states, and especially countries in the Horn of Africa.
I mean, as part of that 1929 agreement, they actually had veto powers on any projects on the Nile and its tributaries as well.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any deal that Egypt would agree to different from the 1929 one?
There's been negotiations with this Nile Basin initiative, which have involved Egypt over the years, but have of course been, they don't want to listen about all this. And this has also been heightened by the fact that Ethiopia has gone ahead with the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, together with other benefits that come with the Nile, which Egypt feel aggrieved. So you can see there is nothing that will really make Egypt happy, especially with the principle of equitable sharing of these Nile waters.
I'm keen to hear from you and curious as to why Nairobi and Kinshasa look to be dragging their feet on committing, whether they're in on this deal or not. Any idea, any sense?
For Nairobi, I think it's just a matter of time, but of course, Nairobi also understands its role as a regional arbiter and conflict resolution player. So they're taking their time in terms of whether to go ahead and ratify this particular agreement. But for DRC, of course, it was also following this wait-and-see particular approach. And again, much of this agreement will be dependent on geopolitical factors in terms of how these countries relate with each other bilaterally or even at the multilateral level. Especially, we can see the geopolitical issues that have been creeping up in the Horn of Africa.
I mean, I know this depends on budgets, but do you expect to see developments along the River Nile now with this deal signed quickly, or do you think countries will slowly look to, do something with the Nile as they gauge the reactions?
So the CFA, which will now come into effect, will give equitable access to these riparian countries, and without a doubt, most of the countries will want to take advantage of this particular agreement of equitable resources and, of course, collaboration amongst each other in terms of taking advantage of development projects, including dams, irrigation schemes, and other development projects. Particularly, we can see Ethiopia will be very pleased with these particular developments. Now it gives it more urge to actually further in terms of development projects in Ethiopia.
If you could very briefly, could this agreement further escalate tensions in the region?
We already seen tensions between just 2 days or 3 days before this protocol came into effect. There was this axis, an agreement between Eritrea, Ethiopia and Egypt, which again really heightened the tensions between, of course it was an attempt to sideline Ethiopia. And of course we saw earlier in the year there was this an agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland over access to the port and all that. So you can see this is already a region that is of course very turmoil in terms of geopolitical factors. So for me, I see it could further increase the tensions in the Horn of Africa region.
We'll have to see how the situation plays out. Dr. Nicodemus Minde, thank you so much for your time joining us from the Institute for Security Studies here in Nairobi.